welcome one and all. It's time for another battle report in Warhammer The Old World, featuring dwarves, and even more dwarves. Dwarves versus dwarves, beards on both sides, some potentially more evil than others. It could be argued that any dwarf that dares march into battle against my dwarves is clearly at least a little bit evil. So, let's dive in. Dwarves are not in the best place competitively right now, it's safe to say. There were just some stats that were made available, and all three of the dwarf sub-factions, if you will, were way near the bottom of the win rate and all the other metrics that they use. So, not doing too great. So, my opponent and I are both obviously trying to tackle this problem by coming up with something that can work for the dwarves, and we've gone about it in slightly different ways, although our lists do have a couple of eerie similarities to them. First point though, you may notice that my army doesn't have any movement trays. That's because, in a hilarious twist, the box that I thought had all my movement trays in did not have them in, so when I arrived I then realised I had no trays. On the plus side though, my army is entirely a gun line and none of my units are planning to move, so it might be fine without movement trays. You'll notice they've got little spaces between them because, as you may know, my bases are slightly too small because they're the old bases, and I use the movement trays with the kind of spaces between them to make them the right size for the old world. So, we've got that out of the way. Now, why are dwarfs struggling? It's tough to put it down to just one thing, because obviously infantry improved, and dwarves have a lot of infantry, but there are some issues. Dwarves can't really benefit from some of those rules that came in. For example, iron breakers didn't get any kind of boost at all in terms of armor save, like a lot of infantry did with their parrying with their shields, because their save is already too high to benefit from it. So some cool units missing out there. Other units that, if they want to kill things, can't really afford to be using the hand weapon and shield to get some of the bonuses, like hammerers, for example. And the fact that you now have to move around across the table to score objectives, potentially bad for an army that isn't that mobile, so we can't really rely on being able to camp somewhere anymore. And not only that, if we do camp now and say to the enemy, come towards us and we'll shoot you, and then you get here and we've got some very slow but very tough units you'll have to fight, they no longer have to do that at all, because they can just hold objectives and stay away from us now. So previously they would have had to actually kill some of the dwarves in order to get some points. So if you built like the ultimate dwarven Death Star with nearly all your points in one unit, and then load up the rest of the army with things that don't give away points, like Doom Seekers, for example, then it became very difficult for the opponent to actually take points off you unless they kill the Mega Death Star. Not really viable anymore, because if you've just got one ultimate Death Star, the enemy will avoid it and just pick up points on all the objectives and go after your cabbages and pick up anything else that isn't in the Death Star while you're very slowly chasing them around. You can't propel your Death Stars around very easily anymore, because the anvil, on average, fails its conveyance spell now, because you need a roll of an 8 on the dice to cast that. So it's just difficult for dwarves to get to work, and even the gun lines struggle against the superior cannon engineering of the likes of Cathay and the Empire, unfortunately. So we'll see what we come up with here. My idea is to have entirely shooting units, so no close combat themed units at all. All dwarven units are reasonable in a fight, especially because you can give many of them great weapons and shields, and iron drakes aren't too bad in a fight either. So they're all shooting units, and then they're going to be loaded up with murderous intent characters. That is the entire plan for this list, and then the rest of the army, in the 2,600 points, we've gone for 2 cabbage squadrons, so 2 units of 2 gyrocopters, who are just big enough to go and harass enemy cabbages, and then the rest is just on war machines. So, let's have a look in the chat before we dive into this too much. Jankmaster's betting on dwarves. That's a fairly safe bet. However, I think that a safer bet with dwarves against dwarves would be to bet on a draw, because that's usually where it ends up. Orlando says this is usually a Sunday. Actually, the tournament reports are usually a Sunday. The battle reports are usually a Friday when I do them. Friday or Saturday, typically. Orlando says, did Andy just go straight for the objectives? You couldn't really chase down your opponent who's being evasive. Going straight for the objectives with dwarves is kind of the way to go because you need to score some points. The issues with doing that is that you can't build ultimate mega death units to do that anymore because you need to contest multiple objectives at once and also defend cabbages and think about going after enemy cabbages, and the units that would do that aren't very good. Have you ever played the dwarf player who has the Die After Dark? Yes, I think we played twice. I think we had a draw in one of those games. I think it's twice. But yeah, he does very well with the dwarves, but I think it's pretty much only him. So if you took him out the equation, then the dwarf win rate would be even lower, which is hilarious because it's already right at the bottom, only above Skaven, I think. So let's go through my list, shall we? I'll go through them as they appear. We have got 16 Thunderers, and they are armed with great weapons and shields, and they have a full command. So they're as tough as they're going to be. Then we've got 2 gyrocopters with steam guns. Steam guns not the best in gyrocopter versus gyrocopter battles, by the way. You'd rather have the clatter guns for that, but the steam guns are good for massed infantry, and it keeps them nice and cheap as well if you're just using them to harass or go after war machines and such. Then we've got my cabbages. We've got a cannon right here. And I've got some runes on my war machines, not expensive ones though. This cannon has a rune of reloading in case it misfires. Then we have got the big unit, 27 rangers. And as usual, it's a big unit of rangers with all the upgrades, so shields, great weapons, crossbows, throwing axes, full command, and the rune of courage, which obviously isn't going to come up in a game against dwarves, but it's what I usually like to run on them anyway. Then we've got a grudge thrower number 1. This one doesn't have any upgrades at all. We've got 2 more, I'll tell you about the characters in a moment, because they are scattered amongst the units. We've got 2 more gyrocopters with steam guns, we've got another grudge thrower. This one has the rune of reloading and the stalwart rune for the extra combat res, but really that's just the cheapest thing you can do to have another one that also has the rune of reloading. Then 20 iron drakes, no trollhammer torpedo because they are lame now, but it does have full command, and cinderblast bombs, which are still great, and the master rune of hesitation, so enemies wouldn't get, for example, impact hits charging into them, which could come up, theoretically, between these lists if the enemy gyrocopters decide to join in the fight. So, the characters. Dragon Master says audio dropped. Is that correct? Has the audio dropped off the video? I can still see the little audio bar going up on my end here. So let me know if that's just you, or if that's a thing that's happened for everybody. I'll probably know if the concurrent viewers count drops significantly. Optimus says audio fine. There we go. So it must just be you. So characters. We've got Burlock in the Rangers. And I've got 2 named characters actually. We've got Burlock in the Rangers and we've got Thorgrim Ulexson in the Iron Drakes. Now named characters, they're interesting because you can typically build a character with better stats. But the named ones tend to come with a special rule that you can't put on a non-unique character. So, for example, on Burlock, he's got the ability to take away the -1 to hit for shooting at long range, which is a really good rule, and you would pay a good amount for those runes. He is very cheap as well, Burlock. Only 85 points, which I think, someone correct me if I'm wrong, is he the cheapest source of leadership 10 in the entire old world? He must be, surely. Is there anything else in the entire game, hero-wise, at leadership 10? And we're not talking about anything that comes with like leadership 10 as default, by the way. So there might be some things. Do like skeletons, do they have like something silly like leadership 10 as well? So something that is actually benefiting the troops. Maybe the cheapest source in the entire old world, potentially. Let me know if there's anything cheaper than that. And Thorgrim has the special rule where he can drop his grudge stone, and that makes the unit unable to move, but also unbreakable, which is a big deal. It's difficult to get unbreakable units. There's certain combos you can do it with, and this is one of them. The issues with Thorgrim is that he's not on shield bearers, so he's only got 3 wounds. He does have a couple of runes that are you could put into other characters. He's got the rune of parrying and the rune of smiting on his weapon and his armor. So he also has a 4+ ward save only against killing blow and multiple wound attacks, though, which is not the best, because with only 3 wounds, anything that he gets into a fight with, like a dragon, for example, is going to easily chew through 3 wounds on a guy that doesn't have much of a ward save without a character in the unit helping him out. And also his weapon is only AP 1. So, you could build statistically a better character than him and put it on shield bearers, but you won't get the ability to make the unit unbreakable, which is a cool extra rule for him. Then, non-named characters, we have got a king on shield bearers. And the king is toughness 10 with the master rune of adamant and 1 rune of fury for an extra attack. So that's his trick, just being toughness 10, so he's incredibly hard to wound. So if there's something coming in that issues a challenge that's just really murdery, then he'd just accept it and probably take little damage against it. Then we have got the Thane BSB with the handgun, Exploding Handgun of Doom, the usual combo, which is, of course, the Master Rune of Bursting Flame, Rune of Rapid Fire, Rune of Accuracy. And then he's also got, on the banner, Master Rune of Grungni for the ward save, and Rune of Battle, which I think is exactly the same combo that my enemy's BSB has in this game as well. Then we've got a Runesmith, who is mostly naked in the Ranger unit to give them the extra armor bane. I think he's got pretty much just armor and doesn't have any runes at all. That is correct. And is that the lot? I think that's my entire army, all 2,600 points. It's 3 points below the limit. Rolando says, toughness 10 for the king. It is a very expensive rune to put him on toughness 10, by the way. The Master Rune of Adamant, I think, is 100 points. Yes, you're paying an extra 100 points to make him toughness 10. And because you're a dwarf, the enemy will often choose not to fight you if you're toughness 10 anyway. So, into my opponent's army, there is a unit of dwarf warriors with full command. There is a unit of longbeards with full command. They both have great weapons, and I think they are drilled as well. Dwarf warriors, not sure if these ones are drilled. The longbeards definitely are. Can dwarf warriors even be drilled? Let me have a look. Opening up a unit of dwarf warriors to have a look at their options. Longbeards, I'm sure they can. And yeah, you can. Dwarf warriors can be drilled as well. So my Iron Drakes are drilled also, by the way. So those are some juicy core units there, and there's also some Rangers. And it's not quite as big as my unit of Rangers, I think it's 23, but it's the same combo. There's a Runesmith in there and Burlock as well, which is the actual Burlock. I need to finish painting mine, but it's been too warm the last few weeks to do much painting. We've got Corgan in the chat. Good evening. So my Ranger unit, in theory, should be better than this one. So if we get into just a Ranger battle, I think I would win, just because I've got more of them. Then my opponent also has 2 units of 2 gyrocopters, but these have clatterguns. They're going to be better in gyrocopter versus gyrocopter fights, so I'm not going to be using mine for that job. I think that's just a waste of time. I'm going to try and use mine for other purposes, which I'll come to in the overall strategy in a minute. And there's a single cannon as well. And the cabbages of my opponent are right up in the top left corner there, represented by that blank base, because he doesn't have any cabbages painted yet. What shame. And let's go back to the wide shot and I'll tell you what my plan is for this game. So, the gyrocopters were deployed fairly early. I don't want to get into a gyrocopter battle, so I haven't put all mine on this side. I think the Thunderers are a pretty good choice to deal with the gyros, though, because those guns are going to do a decent job. There's not a lot of wounds in the gyros. And if they do charge in, the Thunderers do have great weapons as well. So they're protecting my flank against gyrocopter incursions. And if the gyrocopters decide they don't fancy that fight and they just fly away, then the Thunderers can start making their way towards this objective and start scoring some points on it. My cannon was intentionally deployed with line of sight to the enemy cannon, because I finished deploying first, so I'm going to get the +1 on the first turn roll. So on average, I should be going first. So I'm going to try and get the first shot in the cannon battle. and take out the enemy cannon first. My rangers are deployed in the woods, so they'll get cover from being shot at, and because the enemy unit is actually so long, they will also benefit from cover, even though it's just like two guys poking behind a building. So we'll be shooting at each other with cover. Then, with my big Iron Drake unit over here, I've loaded that up with the King and the BSB and Thorgrim, so 3 very expensive characters in there and a load of Iron Drakes. My plan is that if I have to fight either of these units, I'm going to try and blast away whichever one I think I can do the most damage to and try and whittle it down before it gets to combat, so probably the Dwarf Warriors. And then with a really good stand and shoot capability with the Handgun Thane of Doom and Cinderblast Bombs, which are both really good for the stand and shoot, and then hopefully rack up a big combat res and win combat. And then Thorgrim is not bad against the... Hold on, I didn't even tell you about the loadout of the enemy characters, did I? Which is important for this bit. So Thorgrim is going to be pretty good against this guy here, because he has got the Master Rune of Smiting, which is the multi-damage one, which Thorgrim gets a ward save against. And the one who is currently at the back of this unit, but will get to the front, I think this guy has got 3 runes of Fury and 3 runes of Shielding, so he's got a 4+ ward save, I think. Or is it this one with a 4+ ward? Because the BSB with the Grungni banner is in this one, so maybe this one has 4+ ward. One of them does anyway. And this one has 3 additional attacks, so this one's very dangerous in a fight. This one does multi-wounds. So Thorgrim would get a ward save against him. And Thorgrim doing d6 wounds on his own attacks is also quite scary to a king on shield bearers who has 6 wounds, so Thorgrim could one-shot one of them, potentially. Under says cabbages, you mean the supply wagon, right? The baggage train, which everyone just calls the cabbage train, and also the enemy dwarves have got a pony cart up there, which is going to speed up these 2 units in marching column, who obviously want to get towards me as fast as possible, and a heavily tooled up, very expensive Doomseeker, who, hilariously, on the mercenary table, fails the test, and then becomes very slow. Just got outbid the wrong side, because they probably put him in like the mercenary tent, which isn't quite as comfortable as the regular dwarf tent. So ends up stepping on something, and now he's very slow. So he's only going to be base movement 2, this Doomseeker, which is quite funny. But obviously he's hiding in amongst these 2 units, and if he gets in, he's heavily tooled up with runes. I think he might be denying armor saves and possibly getting extra attacks as well, so he's very scary Doomseeker. So I don't want to be fighting him. So, if I have to fight those 2 units, I want them heavily whittled down by gunfire from the Iron Drakes first. The Rangers versus Rangers looks like it's just going to be a shooting gallery, and the Thunderers are just on this side as a gyrocopter deterrent. Because if you want to take the cabbages, you need 2 gyrocopters alive, so if I just kill 1 out of each unit, they can no longer interact with the cabbages. My gyros, this unit here, is going to try and get the enemy cannon. This one is going to try and get behind the enemy lines, and then if we do get into combat, I can then charge them into the rear of something. The dilemma for me is going to be, when do I stop moving the Iron Drakes and drop the Grudge Stone, which is going to make them unbreakable unless they move again, in which case they wouldn't be unbreakable anymore. And let me just check the wording on it. Can you actually choose to move after dropping the Grudge Stone? Let's have a look, because that's quite important. Set the Grudge Stone. Unbreakable, automatically pass any panic test. However, once the Grudge has been set, Thorgrim's unit cannot choose to flee as a charge reaction and cannot move other than to give ground, make a follow-up move, or to reform. So they can reform, which is important, and they can give ground and follow-up. So you're pretty much stuck where you are once you drop that Grudge Stone, but you are unbreakable. So let's go into the first turn, which goes to me, so I win the roll. The gyrocopters are just hiding from the enemy copters because they don't want to be charged because of scary things like impact hits, so just hiding behind there and then going to pop out next turn. Thunderers have moved up because there's nothing to shoot yet. My Rangers take aim at the enemy Rangers and kill about 1 or 2 of them. I think it's just 1 actually, so a very disappointing round of shooting there. The Iron Drakes move up. There's not really any juicy targets yet, except for the Thane BSB with the Handgun of Doom, and he kills maybe a couple of Dwarf Warriors. Nothing too significant yet. My cannon hits the enemy cannon, by the way, and rolls a 1 to wound, so fails to wound the enemy cannon, and the grudge throwers don't do anything yet either. So not much happening round 1, but we do score 30 points each for being on objectives with core units. Turn 1 for the enemy, and immediately these units in marching column are heading straight towards me. The Longbeards and the Dwarf Warriors obviously want to engage with my shooting stuff as fast as possible. I've got all the points in the Iron Drake unit. Doomseeker can't keep up very easily because he's been reduced in his movement speed, and obviously he can't put a single model into marching column, so he can't go any faster than that. The enemy gyrocopters just pop out from round the hill, and they're going to take aim and try and shoot mine. The enemy cannon one-shots my cannon. So my cannon rolled a 1 to wound, the enemy cannon shoots at my cannon in retaliation and kills it in one shot. So you see there how unreliable dwarf artillery is against each other, because if you roll well, you can just blow them up, enemy artillery, in one shot. But you can also fail horribly. On average, you do not kill artillery in one hit with a dwarf cannon. It usually takes 2 successful hits. 2 successful wounds, I should say. Enemy rangers fire upon my rangers and kill a couple as well. So not much going on there yet. So, this is where we find ourselves. What am I going to do now in this turn coming up? The gyrocopters do not want to be charged by the enemy copters, and both units are too close for me to get impact hits from charging them. So instead I'm going to hop over the hill and threaten the enemy cannon, and then try and survive 1 round of shooting after that before I go after it. The Thunderers are going to take aim at the enemy copters. Then my copters here are going to get into a position where they can't be charged by anyone and just perch, waiting for next time. Rangers are going to keep firing on Rangers. Grudge Throwers are going to try and drop onto the Dwarf Warriors, and the Iron Drakes are going to try to blast the Dwarf Warriors all the way back to their hold. Another 30 points each, which I keep keeping track of with these dice here, so we're up to 60 points so far each. And into my turn. The Thunderers do not do much to the enemy gyrocopters, unfortunately. My copters pop out. I do really like, by the way, this old gyrocopter, the metal one. It's just a real pain to transport. It's got really nice detail on the model, and I like my paint job on it on the propellers. I think... Do I prefer it to the plastic one? I think so. But the fact that it's metal means it's just horrible to take anywhere. And I can't imagine trying to transport multiples of these metal ones, even if I had that many. It's actually maybe equally annoying to assemble the two, because the plastic one does have these horrible little pokey bits that go around the rotors that you have to get aligned perfectly. But once they're assembled, maintenance-wise, the plastic ones are obviously a dream compared to this metal contraption. The Rangers and the Grudge Throwers take aim, and what's that? A Grudge Thrower aims for the Dwarf Warriors, it scatters and lands perfectly on top of the pony cart and destroys it in one hit. I'll take it. Pony cart has been obliterated by a stray Grudge stone. Okay, some Rangers have fallen as well, but not many. Didn't manage to shoot down many, so it's looking like this could be a long old shooting match, and maybe they'll just accomplish nothing over the course of the game, these 2 Ranger units. The Iron Drakes and the Thane of Doom take aim and kill a few more Dwarf Warriors, but not a huge amount yet. They're too far away to charge, so I'm not worried about dropping the Grudge Stone yet. You can see the 2 gyrocopters there perched and ready to strike at something in a minute as well. And another 30 points each. Now this game is going by pretty quick because we've not got into combat yet, and the shooting, especially when I'm firing with dwarves, it's very fast because I've used these units so much. I don't need to cross-reference their stats or anything. So, into turn 2 for the enemy evil dwarves, and you can tell some of them are facing sideways here, which is a trick a lot of people do when they go into marching column, to save having to take loads of models off the tray and putting them back on in a different position. Just turn the command group round to face the right way and leave everyone the way they want to be in, eventually, is what usually happens. So they're all advancing on the Iron Drakes. And I'll have a choice to make next turn. I can either back away and not drop the Grudge Stone. I can reform into a different shape, go either wider or more narrow, which I can with drilled, and drop the Grudge Stone. And I can then shoot the enemy. coming up against two really hard-hitting enemy units. You might think you want to go as narrow as possible, which would limit the number of stand and shoot models I have, but it would mean that less of the enemy are going to be able to punch me, which would be good. Okay, so the 4 gyros pop out up there again, which I don't mind because it means they're not hassling my cabbages, they're just hassling my gyros instead, and they managed to get one of them down to a single wound. And then it's finished off as well. I think with either the cannon with a bit of grape shot, possibly. Then the enemy rangers fire at mine and don't do much again. So that is going to rage on to next turn. And you'll notice that my Thunderers now have nothing really to shoot at, so next turn they're going to start gunning for that objective, getting as close to it as possible. And another 30 points each. So we're about to see some serious action very soon, because we're going into turn 3. My single surviving gyrocopter charges into the enemy cannon. The final crew member survives by rolling a 6 on its armor save, so deflects the final blow from the gyro, and is stubborn, of course, being Dwarf War Machine crew, so it's going to survive. Very close to being dead, though. Then the Rangers open fire into the enemy Rangers, and again, they kill a couple. The Rangers not doing very well against each other. This is my chosen Iron Drake formation to face the enemy now. I choose not to go too narrow. For one, I actually can't go very narrow, because I've got 2 single base characters in there, and I've got the King on Shield Bearers there as well, who's massive. So I would be limited. I could maybe drop... How many ranks could I legally drop there? I've got 2 normal rank and file models there. I've got 1 there. I've got the command. So I could go a little bit more narrow. And we're going to get charged now, because I have set the Grudge Stone, so the Iron Drakes are now unbreakable. You can see we're amassing victory points at the same rate with our Ranger units. Into the enemy turn. So both these units are going to charge me, and you can see the stand and shoot kills 5 Dwarf Warriors, which is actually disappointing because my Thane, with his Handgun of Doom, has been on average missing one of his shots each time so far. So he actually only killed about 1, and he could potentially have killed about 10 on his own. So that's a bit disappointing. Cinderblast Bombs did some good damage though, and there is a bit of a residual ward save coming in from the banner from this unit as well. They do have a 6+ ward save. In fact, let me just double check that, because I want to check how that's worded. I can just open up my Thane here. Let's see, Master of Grungni. Ooh, okay then. So actually, I don't think they should get a 6+ ward save against a stand and shoot, because it's only a 6+ ward save against wounds suffered during the shooting phase. Interesting. So I can't remember whether any ward saves were actually successful, and it would have only been 6+ anyway, from overhanging next to it. But important to remember, that only affects the shooting phase, so I don't think that would affect stand and shoot. You can see I did 6 damage with the stand and shoot there. And both units do make the charge. It was not a super long charge, but it was possible like one of them could have failed, but they both made it in. And I'm not super disappointed that we've got some combat, because my plan is for Thorgrim to whomp this king in the face. The enemy gyros, 2 of them charge into my lone gyro that was fighting the cannon, and the other 2 are just hanging out for the time being. So this is where I decided to take all the cinematic shots for the thumbnail, with the 2 kings going head to head there. And Thorgrim versus the other king. And the other 2 gyrocopters actually decide they're going to move over here, behind the Thunderers. Then the enemy Rangers take aim and kill a couple of mine, so again, not much being accomplished there. I just about lose combat against the enemy here with my gyrocopter and give ground. Cannon chooses not to, or attempts to not follow up, because obviously it doesn't want to be stuck in combat when it's just got 1 guy left who the gyrocopter failed to kill this turn despite being able to attack him. Okay, are you ready for some drama? In a challenge, Thorgrim, Ulexon, and the Dwarf King with the Master Rune of Smiting, which means Thorgrim gets his 4+ ward save against it, get into a challenge with each other. The enemy king swings first, gets a wound through, and Thorgrim passes his ward save, at which point Thorgrim swings back with his mighty 3 attacks. It's so disappointing, isn't it, when you have this really cool, killy, allegedly, character, but they only have 3 attacks. But they are d6 wounds. One of them gets through the enemy save. So I'm going to roll the d6 to see how many wounds he's going to do. If I roll a 6, this king is just dead. And that is a huge chunk of points, and I probably just win the combat as well, which is a huge deal for the game if he dies. But I roll a 1 instead, and he takes 1 wound, so he's got 5 left. Wow, wow, wow. So I end up losing combat, but of course my unit is stubborn, and they just give ground. So my unit is going to be stubborn until Thorgrim dies, which I don't like the chances of that happening too much against this guy, because I've got a ward save against his attacks. Okay, into my turn 4. We're still scoring at the same steady rate. I turn my Thunderers round, try to shoot down one of the gyrocopters before they go for my cabbages, but don't do any damage because of course they're ponderous. And for anyone who's joined this late, the reason I don't have any movement trays is because they were not in the box I expected them to be in, and I forgot to take them with me for that reason. My Grudge Thrower blows itself up hilariously. My 2 gyrocopters are now dead. How did that happen? Well, they charged into the rear of the enemy dwarf warriors. They actually did a good amount of damage, but the... Hold on. I remember what happened here. So, they weren't in a challenge. It felt like a challenge because they both directed their attacks into each other, but that actually wasn't a challenge. The challenge was between somebody else. It was a unit champion, I think, that went into the challenge instead. And just failed to kill each other, the 2 unit champions. I think that's what happened. So they weren't in a challenge, which meant that this king was free to then swing at the gyrocopters afterwards and managed to kill both of them, which is very sad. But they did do some good damage in there, and if one of them had survived, I would have got a big boost to my combat res as well. You can see that the enemy dwarf warriors nearly completely wiped out. The Iron Drakes have lost quite a lot as well now, but heroes intact. Again, Thorgrim doesn't do anything to the enemy king, unfortunately, this time. So, not much happening there. You can see over here this combat is still raging on. And I think I actually won the combat up there with my single gyrocopter against 2 that time and pushed them back a bit. 2 ranger units whittling each other down very slowly. So Grudge Thrower blowing itself up was the highlight of the turn there, unfortunately. Then into the enemy turn, the 2 gyrocopters that have not taken any damage turn and fly and touch the cabbages, so that next turn they'll be able to dismantle my cabbage mining vessel. Unless I can turn around and kill one of them with shooting. Because at that point there's not enough unit strength for them to actually interact with cabbages anymore. And more ranger shooting, ineffective. More gyrocopter combat going on. And this time, loads of the Iron Drakes get horribly butchered this time, which is very sad. You can see that Thorgrim got a successful wound through against the enemy king again, and was able to roll a d6 for the Master Rune of Smiting, and did 3 wounds. So I've got that through twice now, so on average dice rolling, this guy is dead, but he's still there with 2 wounds. And they wisely, after winning combat, choose not to continue, because he's only got 2 wounds left, and the Dwarf Warriors are down to 2 models as well, so they're almost dead. You'll notice none of the Dwarf Warriors died this turn, despite me putting loads of attacks into them. And then all the Iron Drakes got whomped apart from one of them, which is the Standard Bearer, because the champion already died previously in a challenge. We've still got the King battle to go, potentially there. And into my turn 5. So, the last Iron Drake does die, but we've got Thorgrim in a battle with the other king now, and Thorgrim does take a wound. Thorgrim is not as survivable against this guy because he doesn't have a multi-wound weapon, so I don't get any ward save anymore since the BSB also got killed in the previous turn. So no ward save for my units at all now. But the toughness 10 king is obviously not going to take much damage. And as long as Thorgrim is alive, they are stubborn. Not stubborn, unbreakable. The gyrocopter battle rages on, 1 versus 2, and they're just hitting each other with pillows, it seems. I don't know whether it would be wise to have pillows in a little helicopter like that anyway, especially stuffed with feathers. If you accidentally unleashed a couple up into the propellers, could get stuck in there, like a bird flying in, could cause havoc. And the Thunderers are just edging their way towards this objective so I can start scoring it. The Rangers turn round and take aim at the enemy gyrocopters and do 1 wound, which isn't going to be enough to save the cabbages, so my cabbages are going to be horribly pillaged in the next turn. And I do score some more points now. I'm peeling away slightly in terms of objective scoring because I've got 2 now with my core units and the enemy only has 1. Into the enemy turn 5. The cabbages are destroyed! And the gyrocopters then fly off and stare at the grudge thrower. And I think they try and shoot it. But next turn they're going to try and charge, no doubt. The challenge rages on here between the enemy king and Thorgrim. And nothing happens there. I think Thorgrim might take another wound, but obviously it's still unbreakable. So it doesn't matter what the combat resolution is, I'm just being nudged slowly towards the edge of the table, but too far away to actually reach the edge by the end. And into turn 6 for me, so this has to be a big turn now. If I don't kill this guy, well, I've probably already lost at this stage, because I've lost the Iron Drakes, they're a very expensive unit, and I am not going to be able to get in and fight these two again. I'm not going to be able to finish off the Dwarf Warriors, so I'm being denied a chunk of points there, and this King is not going to be finished off, because I'm probably not going to be able to fight him again. I would have to hope to get lucky and land a rock on his head with the one surviving Grudge Thrower in the next turn. So, let's see. The gyrocopter battle continues, they're just terrible at hitting each other apparently. Thorgrim and the King survive again, and this King just whomps down a few more Longbeards. The Grudge Thrower does not successfully hit anything. The Rangers turn round and shoot the enemy gyrocopters and kill one of them, which is good. And that's about it. The Rangers are not going to be affecting each other too much during this game now. So really, the rest of the game has been, what's a good phrase that they use, like a wash, they would say. Because nothing over here is dying much. The cannon died, the pony cart died, the Grudge Thrower blew itself up. Not much else has happened over there. Over here, if Thorgrim had rolled well, if he'd rolled a 6 the first time, or if he'd rolled a 5 the second time and just killed the enemy king, that would have swung what's going on over here quite significantly as well, and would have got me a lot more points. And especially if I'd managed to win that first round of combat when they charged in, because that means they would have had to back away at least, and I would have then had another turn to shoot them, which would have been a massive deal. To win that first round after you get charged is huge when it's your turn next and you're a shooting unit. And that, I think if I'd rolled like 4 wounds on him instead of 1, I think I would have won that round. But as it is, because Iron Drake's primarily a shooting unit against primarily 2 enemy fighting units, Dwarf Warriors actually are worse than Iron Drakes at fighting, but Longbeards are obviously better with their great weapons. So on average, I would expect to slowly lose over the course of the game, once I didn't get that one big whomping attack through that could have finished off this king. So with my final turn, not much happens, and in the enemy turn, the Grudge Thrower is being attacked by a gyrocopter. The enemy rangers aren't going to accomplish much. My gyrocopter finally dies. We finally managed to kill a gyrocopter unit. The Grudge Thrower loses a crewman and falls back off the table. And Thorgrim finally gets killed. He takes his last wound from this king, and my king then flees off the table and dies. So obviously that turns it into a larger win for the evil dwarves. But you can see how that was very delicately poised once we got into that big combat. My gun line, I don't think the ranger battle really did anything for either of us. And the fact that I had more of a gun line meant that if the shooting went well, I would probably win. If the shooting didn't go well, I would probably lose, and both units got in without taking enough damage, probably. I don't think my shooting did quite enough. And once we got bogged down in combat, it was slowly just chipping through the Iron Drake ranks, and once I lost my BSB, because I didn't have the ward save anymore, that was a big deal, and I was never able to attack the enemy BSB because he was hanging off the end of the unit, so I never had anyone actually touching him to punch him in the face, which is sad. So what could I have done differently? The Iron Drake's shooting was disappointing. I didn't do much damage with it, so maybe I should have gone more narrow with the drilled before I got charged, because I could have done a reform, and because they're drilled, that means I could have redressed the ranks as well, despite having set the Grudge Stone. I don't think redressing the ranks is outlawed under those circumstances, because you can still reform. So maybe I should have gone more narrow as possible. And how narrow is that? Because you have to keep the command group there. So I could have dropped 2 or 3 off the front rank probably. I don't know whether that would have made a huge difference though, because this is the guy that needs to do most of the attacking. And then the others only need to be within range to fight, and it means I'm still not able to hit him. And there was plenty of characters either side for challenges. I think the issue was Thorgrim, even though he could have single-handedly won the game for me, I think another king on shield bearers would have just been better. I think building a king on shield bearers is better than Thorgrim, unfortunately. Maybe Thorgrim is good for the Iron Drakes because I was going to mostly lose combat and it kept them unbreakable and kept them around for longer, but it was only delaying the inevitable, I think. So maybe it kept everything else alive longer. So, interesting things to think about. I think I do need another character on shield bearers, so I might just get the same kit but put Queen Helga on the shield bearers because I've got the miniature. So that would be a cool project, I think. So I could have 2 characters on shield bearers then, which seems to be the best way to do it because you're getting a lot more wounds and you get a few extra attacks as well sprinkled in. Oh, there was one hilarious moment I forgot to mention actually. My king got into a challenge with an enemy unit champion at one point. My king with the 5 great weapon attacks. And I chose to actually use a hand weapon and shield in the challenge, because that meant the king got to go first with 5 attacks, because if I used my great weapon, the shield bearers would fight, and the 3 shield bearers probably kill the enemy unit champion, and then the king doesn't even get to swing. So I decided to go with the hand weapon so that I could have all 5 of my attacks. But, in a hilarious twist, with those 8 attacks going into the enemy unit champion, I didn't actually kill it, which is hilarious. So, what do we think about the future of the Dwarves? Is this the way the games have to be now? Do you either have a mega gun line with killy characters in the units to help them a little bit in combat, or do you go fighty units and just try and get towards the enemy as fast as possible? Which is difficult now the anvil is very hard to get the conveyance spell off with. Pony cart and going into marching column with drilled units is still a viable way to get across the table. Against some armies, is there going to be anything there for you to fight when you arrive? I would question that. Against any kind of elusive army like Wood Elves or Dark Elves, or anything that can run lots of skirmishy like Bretonnians, I don't think there'll be anything there for you to fight when you arrive, particularly. So it seems like, logically, the best thing to do is just get units forward onto the objectives and sit there and score points. The issue is, I don't think dwarves can spread power wide enough across multiple units to actually be able to hold on to those objectives when the enemy come calling. The enemy are usually going to be more manoeuvrable, so they can concentrate their force where you're spreading out on multiple different objectives. If you focus on one objective, they'll just take the rest. And they've got more cabbage hunting capabilities than dwarves, unless you run a lot of gyrocopters. There are a lot of cheaper units than dwarves that can do the same job dwarves do, but better, unfortunately. When it comes to big infantry grinds, then we're looking at like Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts with massive blocks of infantry, and dwarves don't really have the damage output to do anything about them. Speaking of damage output, I actually totally forgot to mention the enemy Doomseeker, which my gyrocopters charged into and killed before they charged into the rear of the enemy warriors after that. So the Doomseeker, though, he was kind of doomed himself from being slowed down, but I still felt I had to kill him, because I thought that the combat would go on for a while over here, and he would get there eventually, at which point he would get stuck in, and he would almost certainly decide it against me with his massive output with that heavily upgraded Doomseeker. Heat says, big shooting bricks with some strong fighty characters is the way, or X-Force, but X-Force is so bandwagon I just don't want to. The issue with that, for me, is I don't want to paint 1,000 gyrocopters, which I think is probably the best thing we can do at the moment. I in fact don't want to paint any more gyrocopters, because they are a nightmare to assemble, and they're not that much easier to paint actually. Trying to get the paintbrush in and around the propeller supports is quite annoying. So I don't really want to do more gyrocopters. The only way I could see myself doing more is if I had a good lead on where to get some of the really old metal ones. You know, the smaller one. Not the metal one I've got with the massive propellers that is a nightmare to transport. The really tiny one with the little guy holding the bomb. That one. If I could get some more of those for a reasonable price, then I'll probably paint those up and maybe use those as the scout gyrocopters in the Expeditionary Force. But the Expeditionary Force does look decent because you can take the good shooting units that can move as well and don't take any penalty for moving and shooting, which is a big deal. You can put the Engineer Sappers in there, which helps a lot when you're being attacked. What else can you take? I don't know whether miners are at all viable in that list, even though they have some extra rules. I still don't really like miners particularly. You can... What you should be able to do with dwarves, with an engineering list, you should be able to make really lots of really cool gun runic combos. The problem is, outside of the Handgun of Doom, I don't think any of them are good. The Stupidity Gun is funny, the one time in 20 that it actually works and someone fails the stupidity test. That is hilarious, but it's not worth the price that you're going to pay to put that on a character. So you have to also be getting something out of that character to begin with. So you have to be taking lots of war machines, so you can take an engineer, and it's worthwhile then spending a bit extra to give him the Stupidity Gun. But lots of war machines aren't really good, unfortunately, compared to enemy war machines. So it's a tricky situation for the dwarves right now, but I think I'm onto the right sort of list archetype that I want to keep tinkering with. I think I just need to tweak what goes into it. I do like Thorgrim, but I think in some matchups he's completely worthless because he will just die immediately in certain matchups. And the only way to keep him alive against, for example, a dragon is if you keep challenging the dragon with cheaper heroes. The problem is, a dragon is not going to charge into the block that has Thorgrim in it, knowing that there's unit champions and inexpensive characters in there that mean the dragon is just going to repeatedly lose combat. He's just not going to choose that fight. So, I don't know about Thorgrim. Ungrim is another one that I don't think has much of a place, unfortunately, because he's expensive and he never gets to fight anything, because anyone, like a dragon, is rightly scared of him and will not go near him. Hammerers are a unit that he is good in, but that means you can't then put other things in the hammerer unit, so they're a bit vulnerable to being shot, and the enemy will just not fight them. Slayers. Are Slayers going to be the future? Do I start painting Slayers as fast as possible, ready for the new Slayer list? Could well be. Could be the way to go. But let me know what you think about the future of the dwarves. Obviously, I don't just have to play dwarves at the moment. I've also got the Warriors of Chaos, and I'm next going to be working on some Chaos Knights, so I can have 2 units of them, which makes me a bit more viable at 2,600 points, which is what a lot of the events that I've signed up for are at that level. I could do with painting a few more Chaos Warrior infantry as well, so I could split my big brick into 2 separate units for objective purposes. So that's something I can do. Other than that, for the dwarves, I don't know. Because I've got such a vast collection of dwarves, I've got so many options. The only thing I don't really have still is a unit of Longbeards. Now obviously, dwarf warriors can just be run as Longbeards, but I don't really want to do that. So I still need to buy and paint some Longbeards, because they are a decent unit. I just don't know whether I want to rush into buying and painting more dwarves when I don't know what's going to happen with the Slayer list for a start, whether I'll want to start painting them, and also will I just be throwing more good money away on units that aren't going to be competitive when I could just be uncompetitive with the units I've already got? Would it really help me at all? I don't know whether that investment would be worth it when I can already put out a lot of dwarf units that are also not that great. This game was actually really fun, by the way. It's possible that you have a dwarf on dwarf matchup that's just a horrible stalemate like it was between the two units of rangers, and your game is over in 20 minutes because they just shoot each other and do nothing. But the fact that we had this really intriguing situation with Thorgrim nearly killing the enemy king twice, which would have completely swung the situation over there and meant I may well have picked up that entire block of dwarf warriors and the king at the same time. And then the other unit of Longbeards would have then been limited in what they could do, and I could have then positioned myself in such a way with the Iron Drakes so that when they charge in I was maybe able to punch the BSB with something, the enemy BSB. So it would have been very interesting had Thorgrim got that little bit of luck over there. But that actually made it quite a fun game. We had a few rolls where we were making ward saves to prevent multi-damage attacks going through. And then the multi-damage attacks themselves are obviously very exciting. So a few really pivotal, exciting dice rolls we had in that combat. Other than that, the rest of the game, not much really happened, which is what usually happens with Dwarf Civil Wars, unfortunately. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap this one up. So, don't forget to check out all the links in the description. And don't forget to leave comments if you've got any input on the dwarf list. What's wrong with it? What would you do to improve the dwarves in the sleekest way possible? So the smallest possible change you could make that would drastically improve dwarves. Because obviously you could look at individual units like Iron Breakers and say they should have a special rule, so they're the only unit, the only infantry unit that should be able to get to a 2+ save with a parry. That would be cool for Iron Breakers, and it would give them a bit of a niche as the most survivable infantry unit. They would then have a role. I also think that they would benefit from, like, we discussed this in a previous video actually, where they could go into a defensive square so that you can't flank or rear charge them, which would be a good niche for the Iron Breakers as well. But obviously GW just don't like Iron Breakers. But other than just individual unit changes, just army-wide, what could we do to the dwarves? One sweeping change, as subtle as possible, that could affect most of the army that would make them competitive suddenly. What's the smallest possible change that you think could make the dwarves competitive? Rolando says, I missed a chunk as I was interrupted. Did your king do more than 1 wound after his initial roll of 1 for damage? Well, he did 1 the first time, and then the next time he did 3, the next time he got an attack through. Thorgrim. So I did 4 wounds in total across the 2 that got through the ward save. So actually, yeah, I think that one did have a 4+ ward save. So he only failed 2, and I only did a 1 and a 3. And so he survived with 2 wounds, which is very sad. Don't forget to check out all the social media shenanigans down there as well. There's Facebook, there's Discord, Twitter, all that good stuff. I'm on Blue Sky as well. I need to post more on these things actually. And obviously, if you want more battle reports to just keep flowing non-stop, and you want me to just buy endless dwarves, then why not pledge your entire life savings in the PayPal or Patreon as well? But most of my, in fact 100% of my disposable income does go on buying miniatures, buying paints and attending tournaments. I don't really do much else with money, because it is my life's passion. And I'm at tournaments most weekends, to be fair. 3 of the 4 out of a month I'm usually at a tournament. Usually one of Old World, one of Age of Sigmar, one of generally Star Wars Shatterpoint, which I don't report on because it's too back and forth to really take photos and explain what happened, and the rules are too weird and abstract to explain it properly. So that's really one you would have to watch the full game on video, I think, in order to understand what's going on, because it's just too much. And the biggest tournament of the year, though, is next week. That is Clash of Kings, the biggest Kings of War event ever, possibly. It's going to have more than 200 players in Nottingham. I'll be taking my Night Stalkers there. So, for anyone who's interested in Kings of War, normally when I go to Clash of Kings, I take my Abyssal Dwarves, who I've got pretty good lists with, and I feel like I could comfortably go there and win 4 games out of 6. But what do I really get for that? There's no prize for winning 4 games. And I've already run them multiple years in a row. So I thought I'll take my much more interesting to look at army, the Night Stalkers, that have got all kinds of eyeballs and tentacles and sculpted eyeballs, in fact, and just big horrible gribbly giants and stuff that I think my opponents would have a fun time playing against. And I'll just see how many games I can win with it. I've not taken a list. I've got an army rather than a list. So it's not a list that's designed for any particular reason other than the units look cool. It's going to be interesting to see how that does on the table at the biggest Kings of War event of all time next week. Oh, before I go, Optimus D says people taking bolt throwers against balloons, I hear. That is interesting. I don't know whether that's the best thing to do, because I've always found that bolt throwers just don't hit. That's the main issue. They just need to have a higher ballistic skill, I think, because the flat 2 damage is nice, because you're not going to have that unfortunate rolling of a 1 like you do with a cannon. So, interesting. They are cheap, though, bolt throwers, so you can take a few. Might be worth messing about with some bolt throwers. Okay, let's wrap this one up. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and all that remains to be said is good night out there, whatever you are.